So we are up to Parshat Chayei Sarah, this week's Parsha. The overview quickly is the passing of Sarah, the burial and the purchase of Marat HaMachpelah in Chevron, Kiryat Arba, the mission of Eliezer to search out a wife for Yitzchak, his coming to the land of Haran and meeting Rivka and finding her chesed to be a sign of someone worthy of Yitzchak, bringing her, negotiating with her family, bringing her back. Finally, the marriage of Yitzchak, the remarriage of Yaakov and Keturah, Avraham and Keturah, and their children. So that's a quick overview of the Parsha, and let's see if we can learn some points in these teachings. So we begin in chapter 23. Okay, you can't do that, Emily. Bring Alma onto the screen and then expect me not to be distracted. Oh my goodness, look at those cheeks. Wonderful. Okay, so Chayei Sarah. So there's a fascinating Rashi here. The verse is peculiar because it mentions her life in three sections. And it was the lives, plural, Chayei Sarah, the lives of Sarah, Me'ah Shana, 100 years, Ve'esrim Shana, and 20 years, Ve'sheva Shanim, and 7 years, Shnei Chayei Sarah, the years of the life of Sarah. So that's a lot of times mentioning years in life when it could have simply said Vayu Yemei Sarah or something like that, Shnot Sarah, Mea ve'esrim v'sheva Shana, and that would have been sufficient. So Rashi points out from a Midrash that just as she was at 20 an innocent, pure person, so too at 100 she was an innocent, pure person. And just as she was beautiful at 7, she was beautiful at the age of 20. And Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch points out that we in our culture may have said this the other way round. Beauty, we would say at the age of 20, and innocence at the age of 7. And here the Midrash says the other way around. Beauty at the age of 7 and innocence at the age of 20. When we think of innocence of a child, right, it's not innocence in a sense. It really is they're not having been exposed to anything. That's not real innocence. Innocence is where somebody has choice, where somebody has exposure and they make choices. That's innocence. Sarah, her innocence is at the beginning of that choice making, where somebody becomes 20. In halachic terms, 20 is the age of somebody becoming responsible for their own actions. And having innocence at that point is having gone through the tumultuous change of becoming an adult and maintaining a sense of who they are. That's the innocence. And to at the age of 100 to be the innocence of someone who begins their journey in that kind of choice that they have had, but nevertheless choosing good. It's a very powerful idea of bat kuf kebat chaf, being 100 like being 20, with the youth and vigor that age gives, but also the innocence in the sense of being fully responsible for oneself. When we think of the beauty of a child, the beauty of a child may be what we call the innocence. It's because there's the purity of potential. There's a purity of character. They have not yet learned the negativity and the tumult that the coming years have brought. That's a very powerful thing. That beauty is the beauty of innocence. That beauty is the beauty not because they are a body, but because they are a mind and a potential, because they are a soul. When we look at children, we see how beautiful, how innocent. It's not really innocence in the sense of having made choices. It's innocence in look how pure that is, how much potential and how much goodness there is in that being, unsullied and unchanged. So we think of the beauty of a 20-year-old. Often that no longer is the soul that we see. It no longer is the potential of a human that we see. It's no longer the mind and heart that we see. When we think of the beauty of a 20-year-old, it may very well be something entirely external. Layers of paint above, covering the person itself. And so the beauty that it talks about here of the 7-year-old, the 20, like at a 7, is the full ability and the full potential that human has as a human, as a soul, as a mind, as a heart, which is the way we hopefully see a child. We see their potential. We see their character traits, ruined, right? Still pure, not ruined by cultural pressures. That's what she had at 20. And that same beauty or innocence from 20 reflected at 100. What a eulogy that is. The next verse says that Avram came to eulogize and to cry for her. But that's the character of the person that these verses want to show us. So Abraham needs to negotiate a burial place for her. And this is a very powerful point about Abraham being a great leader and teacher, but still is a foreigner. He still does not have what would be considered in ancient cultures a very basic land right, a place to bury your own family, a family plot, which is a very powerful thing. But he respects that by saying, Ger v'toshav anochi imachem. Look, I'm an inhabitant already. I've been living here for so long. I've had peace pacts with all of you, but yet I am a ger. I'm still a foreigner amongst you. And so please allow me to have that right by purchasing a land, burial site for my family, for my wife. And he seeks out this place called Chevron. It is interesting that the Hebrew word for Chevron is from the Hebrew word lechaber, to connect. Chevron. The on in Hebrew is really something that facilitates something. In modern Hebrew, you have like a maznon, right? That's like a cafe or something that provides mazon, right? Food. So maznon. So the on in many words like that in modern Hebrew. Sha'on, sha, it makes it a noun. That's right, Emily. So a sha is an hour. Sha'on is that which provides or facilitates the hours. So a watch. So Chevron is that which facilitates connection. It's a very powerful idea, the way we see burial. The verse says, Ki me'afar ata va'al afar tashuv, for you come from the dust and you return to the dust. The soul comes from above and returns to its source. Chevron is the ultimate place of that connection. It brings the human, which is body and soul, back to its source. And so you have the Ma'arat HaMachpelah. It's a very powerful thing. You have the double cave. The double cave, Rashi quotes the Midrash and the two interpretations, both because it had a double cave, a cave above a cave, and because couples were buried there. It's a very powerful idea that you have couples buried there because these couples are what you would say the founders of the universe. Adam and Chava, Avraham and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka, Yaakov and Leah, meaning this is the ultimate connection, chibur, the ultimate connection, an eternal connection, because they come back to burial there to bring them back to the connection of body to the earth and soul to its source. And that's this double cave. A very powerful idea. We have Avram's negotiations with Ephron, and the Mishnah in Avot and it tells us, Emor me'at va'aseh harbe, be of those that say a little, but do a lot. Like Avraham in last week's Parsha, which we missed, where he says, come, let me give you a little bit of bread, a little water, and we'll, and then you go on your way. But when they agree, he goes in and has Sarah make some breads or rolls or ugot, and he runs to the Ben Abakar, he comes and he brings them butter and meat and delicacies. All he offered was bread and water. But once they accepted, he went all out and made a feast for them. But don't be like Ephron, who speaks a lot, but does very little. He made great gestures. Oh, please, you're such a great person. Nasi, you're a prince amongst us. And take the land. I want it to be yours. However, Avram insists, no, I want to pay. He says, oh, come on. What's a piece of land worth just a few hundred coins from between friends? And Avram heard that and understood that he was naming a price while saying it's yours gratis, in front of the Bnei Chet. He's so gracious, but also dropping the hints of how much he wants for it. And Avram hears that. Very interesting verse in 15. In 15, he says, Adoni, my master, Shma'eni, listen to me. Eretz arba meot shekel kesef beni ven chamahi. It's a 400 silver shekel piece of land between you and me. Well, what's that? How much is that worth already? Big deal, right? Et metcha kavar, go ahead, bury him. But Avraham heard, Vayishma Avram el Ephron, the next verse. And Avraham heard that. He understood very well what Ephron was saying. He was acting gracious and showing grace, but he knew that if he didn't actually pay up, he would not have the land he needed. Vayishkol Avram leEphron et hakesef asher diber bazneres, and Avraham weighed out the exact amount that Ephron had enumerated, had stated. There's a subtlety in the understanding of character, the understanding of the potential damage to his own a family plot if he didn't actually pay it, but also the lesson of how to speak. Let's be like Avraham, make small offers and come through in a great way, rather than speak as if we are being very gracious. The term in Hebrew is chanufa, being, I don't know the English word for chanufa, to make believe you're being also gracious, but really you're not.
Yeah.
What's the word?
You're sucking up to someone.
Sorry?
Sucking up to someone.
Sucking up, yes, that is. Under promise and over deliver is the idea, yes, Kathy. And that's the Mishnah, and that's the idea we can learn from Avraham and Ephron, one from the way they did it and one from the way they didn't. The next section deals with the whole episode of Eliezer going to find a wife, Rivka, for Yitzchak. And it begins with Avraham Zaken ba Yamin. Avraham was elderly, ba Yamin, he came with his days. And Hashem berach et Avram bakol, and Hashem blessed Avraham bakol, with literally means with everything. Baba Yamin is a term that we use from this verse in Tanakh, meaning somebody who is who's coming along with their days. But it's a very powerful idea. Baba Yamin is somebody who has brought along their days. Every day counted. They have actually have something from, they haven't just aged. They actually have brought that along. Baba Yamin, they come with their days, a translation. But it doesn't say biyamim, in days, which would just be generic, but bayamim, in the days, comes along with the days, meaning each day was specific, each day was special. When somebody makes the day count, then it's the day as opposed to a day. If every day is just generic, every day is the same. Bayamim. In Hebrew, the difference between b and ba is fundamental. Ba means in the, specific. It's meaningful. Every day is an eternity. Every day is something that we can do. And for Avraham, who had dedicated time and life to give to people and to teach and to think, every day that was a day that was monumental in and of itself. And that's what Baba Yamin comes, bringing along every one of those days. There's a lot that is expounded upon in the end of this verse. Hashem berachat Avram bakol. And Hashem blessed Avraham bakol, in everything. There's a lot of Kabbalistic ideas and a lot of other ideas I'll touch on briefly in a moment. I think there's a basic idea here, which I find particularly in these weeks from myself and my family, but throughout the time that the entire world is living now. Avram had just lost Sarah, his beloved wife. He cried and he eulogized her and had to negotiate and pay hefty price to have a place to bury her. He could have been bitter. He probably was sad, but he could have been bitter. He could have said, here I am, I'm an accomplished person, I'm elderly, what do I have? I lost my wife, I had to fight for a place to bury her, pay through the teeth. And he could have been bitter. And being Avraham, being someone who every day was monumental and having the blessings of every day were such a great fortune, that what he saw himself is, Vashem berachat Avraham bakol. In everything he had, he felt blessed. He saw the blessing Hashem has given him in everything. That's a very powerful idea. We have so much to be thankful for, always. But we also have challenges, always. Sometimes they are very weighty, and we have reason to be bitter, definitely sad. And sometimes they are very hard. No doubt that was a hard period for Avram. But yet, he fully felt, Hashem berachet Avraham bakol. Hashem blessed Avraham in everything. Everything he had, every moment, every day, every possession, every teaching, every follower, every student, his children. That is the blessing he had. Emily, go ahead. Unmute yourself. This is a dialogue. I've been blabbering. Go.
Sorry, I'm new here, so I didn't. That was a serious question. I didn't want to interject. I love that. I wanted to offer a different way of looking at what you just described, which I think is also true, that the other way of looking at it is that, Abraham as a personality in, as we've been following his journey, his real climax of his journey is the Akedah, which is where he just came back from, right? When he was going, that's the moment that we really think about with Avram. And from a sort of storytelling point of view, that's the end. Like, that's it. He got to this pinnacle of sort of human enlightenment and connection with God, and what got over that obstacle. And then came back, and his wife passed away. And obviously on a personal level, that's, probably very sad and very devastating for him. But if we think about him as, this is the journey of the father of the Jewish people, then the pinnacle, the end of the story was really the Akedah. And what's interesting is that when he comes back, and we spend so much time talking about how he buried Sarah, and how he was trying to buy Marat Machpelah, the cave. It's really like he came back, and all he's doing is setting up everything that he needs to continue the legacy, right? It's no longer about him. Like, there is a personal element of what's going on with him losing his wife, but really the story is about him. He's buying Marat Machpelah, and the purchase of Marat Machpelah is actually very, very significant, because it establishes domain for the Jewish people in Israel. And there's actually, there's like Parshatim that also talk about, I'm sure they talk about the fact that the reason there's so much back and forth, like, there's not an extra word in the Torah, right? So there's like a lot of words talking about them going back and forth. And you were talking about, Ephron being very, sort of, I also don't know what the word is in English, really, like being like, oh no, I'll just give it to you. And there's a lot of fighting back and forth. And Avram, there are Parshatim that talk about the fact that Avram was very adamant that he pay for it, and he paid full price for it, so that it would be known that it was theirs. And he bought the entire thing with the tombs that were, the space that was left to be there for the rest of the Jewish people. So there's also, like, I was thinking, like, when you're talking about Bakol, like, his entire life, really all of his actions right now are just setting, like, he has gone through everything. He's gotten all the blessings. He knows, like, the real blessings of Avram are the blessings of Brit Ben Betarim, right? That he's actually going to have, like, this whole legacy of a nation after him. And so he's just not literally sitting there, but, like, essentially, like, he's gotten to this is like the denouement of his story, where he's just setting up the stage for the next chapter, which is,
he's ready to hand off.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that is a blessing of Bakol, and that's a good segue. Thank you, Emily, for the Midrash, which is that he now has descendants. He has a child, and he is ready to marry off that child. The only thing missing is to find a wife for that child, so that the Am Yisrael can continue. So, as Emily was saying, the Rashi quotes and it comes from the Gemara in Bava Batra that really. The blessing of Bakol was that he had everything, that he had attained in his own life, his perfection and his growth, to the point that now he's ready to hand that off. He has a child, and he's ready to find the only thing missing, which is a family for his, the establishment of Am Yisrael through the descendants. And so he needs a wife for that child. So yes, the end of the chapter of Avraham essentially is here. After this, Avraham does not. We see Avraham remarry, and that takes a few verses, and then it's all about Yitzchak from there on. So Emily, correctly pointed out that this is really the height or the culmination of Avram, and this is the blessing of Bakol. So we have these two interpretations, or the two aspects that we have. We have Avram, no matter how difficult or what challenges he had, it was Bakol. Everything was a blessing, and also the blessing of having children and having progeny to further the ideas and the teachings that Avram had, so that the establishment of Am Yisrael in through those descendants will come. It is interesting. We say in the benching with Birkat Hamazon, we say, just as you blessed our ancestors, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Bakol, Mikol, Kol. The 3 times that with each one of them, they had the blessing of everything, of plenty. By Avraham, here, having had a child and having children. By Yitzchak, it's when Yaakov gave him food, and he gave Yaakov the blessings. So having sustenance is mikol, va'ochel mikol, and I already ate from everything, he says. And by Yaakov, he makes peace with his brother Esav, and he says, oh, keep the gifts I've given you, ki yesh li kol. I have everything already. And so it is interesting that in the bracha of Birkat Hamazon, we conclude the blessings with the prayer, bless us with the 3 things, children, sustenance, and peace, as you blessed our ancestors, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. But this is the bracha of Avraham Bakol. In the Ramban here, you can see it on your own. He goes through a lengthy explanation of a mystical idea of Bakol, the attribute of Hashem, in interacting with us, where there's a balance of all of the attributes, and Avram having that. But that's beyond the scope of a conversation like ours. So Avram makes Eliezer take an oath, and he says, I make you take an oath, Bashem, in the name of Hashem, Elokei Hashamayim ve'Elokei Haaretz, God of the heavens and God of earth, that you may not take a wife from the Canaanites, but rather go back to my homeland, to Haran, and find a wife for my son there. It's interesting, what specifically was he looking for? What was the necessity that they go back, and why why he mentioned the God of heaven and God of earth? It is this dichotomy which was foreign to early ideas. The idea, Rambam talks about this in the introduction to Avodah Zarah, and that originally everybody understood that there was a single deity of which everything emanated from, a creator, but it was too high, too great for the human to connect to. And so you needed some godheads. And Abraham's idea of monotheistic idea is that every individual, regardless of where they are, who they are, can connect with Hashem, with the divine creator. We missed the previous Parshat where we saw that, unfortunately, Lech Lecha Vayera, I was not available. But here, the continuation of this idea through Yitzchak, who has a different personality, a different attribute than Avraham himself. Avram being an Ish HaChesed, and Yitzchak being what in Kabbalistic ideas called Din, someone who is much more in tune with himself and Kadosh and sanctified to God. There was a need to balance that idea. And so the wife had to come from the attributes that Avram had. It had to be someone who is connected not only with Elokei Hashamayim, but also Elokei Haaretz. Someone who could bring out the potential that Avraham, that Yitzchak had, which is the potential of bringing forth the balance of din and chesed. Yeah, Emily, why don't you say what you're just saying? That's a beautiful idea.
I'm trying not to be disruptive.
Not disruptive. This is a conversation. But when we sat around the table, it was much more of a conversation. Unfortunately, it's on Zoom. So go ahead. Take it away.
No, I was just thinking that, when you say heaven and earth, it reminds me of Brit Bein HaBetarim, which is when God promised Abraham that his children would be like the stars in the sky and the grains of sand. And he actually, my understanding is that he sent Eliezer back to Haran because he knew he still had family there. And so it sort of connects it to, it's like the literal bloodline, connecting to what he's actually trying to achieve, which is to fulfill that prophecy or that blessing that he got from God.
Right. So Emily is saying that in the promise that Hashem made to Avram, that he will have those descendants, it makes heaven and earth the promise that they will be like heaven and earth. But that heaven and earth idea is the ability to be spiritual completely and also in this world physical, to be chesed, to do ben adam lachavero, between one person and another, the kindness and goodness and care and compassion that we need, as well as have a spiritual connection with the divine, our neshama being alive within us. And so in order to be able to do that, he says, look, I need you to make this promise to me because of Elokei Hashemayim Elokei Haaretz, the connection that we have to the divine in our physical being and in our spiritual.
So Rabbi, why Haran and not Ur?
That's where his family is originally, and that's where they are. But why not Ur, where he came from directly? As we saw at the end of Noach, in the beginning of Lech Lecha, his family is already no longer there. They are in Haran. Right. So go back to where my family is. Go back to people that have the ability to bring this forth within my child. Mm-hmm. And so he makes that oath and he goes, and verse 10, throughout much of this story, even though that Eliezer is clearly a distinguished person, Hamoshel b'chol asher lo, in verse 2. He is in control of all that Avram has, a master of the home. Nevertheless, throughout the verses, he is called Ha'eved, the servant. And there's a very unique idea here, because if you want to see the great chesed being done by Rivka, you have to see the person that she is taking such good care of. It's not only that she saw the animals and said, you know what, I'm not only going to give you to drink, but I'm also going to let the camels drink. And I'm not just going to say, go ahead and use my trough. I'm going to fill the trough for them. But look how she addresses Eliezer. Eliezer does this as a sign. I'm going to test this. Whoever comes out and I ask for water and they give water to me and my animals, that's a good sign. And that happened. But it even more happens. In verse 17, the Eved, the servant, throughout the story, the Eved, the servant, the servant, the servant, he runs towards her and he says, Hagmi'ini na ma'at mayim mikadech. Let me take a swig from your Hagmi'ini. It's not the nicest of terms. Let me take a swig out of your jug, just a little bit of water, right? Vatomer, and how does she respond? Shitei Adoni. My master takes some to drink. Vatamaher, and she's quick, and she takes the jug off of her arms. And vatashkehu, she doesn't just, the change of term from tagmi'eni, right, which is give me a swig, she gives him a proper drink. He comes to her as a servant, and she treats him like a human. And that's a very powerful idea in Rivka's ability to see the equality of each human. This is what Avraham is coming to treat everybody. Every passerby gets chesed. The idea of every individual human having a direct connection with Hashem is the teaching of Avraham. It's not that polytheistic religions didn't know that there's a God of gods, but that they thought a human being can't connect to that God because we're too lowly. And so we have a caste system. You're the lowest of the low. And then there's somebody a little higher, and then there's somebody a little higher. And Avraham, Nasi, a prince, is there serving people under the guests. Come on in and I'll wash your feet for you and make some bread for you. And the need for Yitzchak to be able to maintain that teaching, to be able to bring that nefesh out in Yitzchak, we needed someone who can maintain that dignity of every human being as well. And so the Eved, and I think this is why the Torah continuously refers to him here as Ha-Eved, because even though he may have looked and dressed and saw himself as an Eved, a servant, she treats him as a dignified human. Drink, my master. Let me give you to drink. And vatashkehu, she gives him a proper drink. Vatachala hashkoto. And not only did she give him a swig, and not only a drink, but completely gave him enough that he felt satiated or totally satisfied. Then she said, I will also draw water and I will give to your camels until they are done. The enormous chesed of this young woman. According to the Midrash Age, according to the calculation, she would have been 36 at this point. According to the Midrash, she is 3 at this point. And obviously, as we've talked about before, the numbers and ages in the Tanakh and Midrash are not there to tell you literal ages. As we talked about, it says by Shaul, right? He was 2 years old. He was 1 year old when he became king. Ben Shana b'malcho, right? He was 1 year old, and Vishnei Shani Malach, and he was king for 2 years. Obviously, he was already a grandfather, as the story tells. So he was not 1 year old, or rather, it means that he something about him that was at its beginning point. And so too, she was 3. The Midrash tells us that she was as pure, she was angelic in her character as a 3-year-old. But someone who very much cares. Sorry, Miriam, I couldn't read that and it disappeared. What was that?
I was just going to ask, so you made that point about Midrash. So when characters are given an age in the written Torah, where it's not just Midrash, it's in the text.
Well, I quoted a text by Shaul. I quoted a text by Shaul. Mm-hmm. By Shaul, it says he was Ben Shana b'malcho. He was 1 year old when he became king. And clearly that doesn't mean it literally 1, because he had a son who was Yonatan, who was David's best friend, and he had grandchildren. Yonatan had children who survived the war with the Canaanites at the end of the 2 years. So clearly he was a grandfather already when he became a king, and yet it says Ben Shana b'malcho. We also have Am Yisrael being in Egypt for 430 years, and we know that wasn't the case. So the numbers, again, in the Torah, everything is there literally, but not historically necessarily. It doesn't mean to tell you we were there for 430 years, but we were there for 430 years in some other aspect, in some other way, whatever that means. So in that case, it means from the covenant, it was 430 years, but there's also another reason that it says it, because there's something about Mitzrayim and 430 years as it connects to Am Yisrael. So just as when we say in halachot and mitzvah, right, it says, and you shall write it on your doorposts, and we don't write it on the doorpost, we write it on a scroll and affix it to the doorpost. We understand that there's the literal meaning of the Torah, as well as the layers upon layers of depth of the meaning of the Torah. And so,
possible that in Mitzrayim, 1 year was like as long as 2020.
Correct.
Right? It was like a 2020 year. It's like every year is like a decade.
Yes.
It felt like.
Yeah, that's what Rashi says right over there. Rashi says that the shibud was so hard that it equaled 430 years. But still, that would require, so what was that calculation? How'd you get from 210 to 430? How did that get there? There's meaning, there's depth and layers as we talk about Torah. We have to realize that the Midrash tells us that Torah is written as well, just as there's ink on parchment, the Torah is also written black fire on white fire, meaning there's a spiritual, deeper level to every verse as there's the pshat, the simple reading of the text, and then layers upon layers. And so here it actually doesn't give us her age, but the Midrash tells us two different ages. One that she was 36 and one that she was 3. There's another Midrash, Tosos quotes that she was 14. Each one of them are telling us another aspect of what we need to know about the character of Rivka, and we have to learn and understand what that's teaching. Okay, so she, in this immense kindness, yes, Miriam, correct, yes. That's true for, and we mention this in the context of Bereshit and Noach. So she, Eliezer goes through and negotiates with the family, tells them that we've got this relative of yours. This is a great story, and the chesed of Hashem who guided me here on that moment. And I made this calculation. I said, if we have someone who's going to make this offer to me, then it's going to be a sign that she is worthy of a person like Yitzchak, and I'm going to take her back. And now he says, Im Yeshchem, in verse 49, and now if you're going to do chesed with me, but not just chesed, kindness, but chesed and emet, truth. You have to recognize the truth. And they respond and say, indeed, me Hashem yatsa hadavar. Yes, we recognize that this is a divinely guided thing. We must let her go. But it's not for us to decide. We have to ask the young woman whether she wants to go, right? So they send her off, and she's on her way back. And
sorry.
Go ahead.
Can I mind if I? It's really interesting to me that Rivka has a couple of moments in this whole divinely predicated situation of free choice, right? Because it says that, basically there's this feeling of like at the well that it was all sort of put together by God. Eliezer was there and he said, God, give me a sign. And then he looks up and he sees the girl, and then it's the girl, it's her, right? And so
from
God
the right family with the right
right, it's the one he's looking for. He doesn't know that at the time, but it happens to be. But like in that moment, she has a choice of how to act, right? Just because she's destined theoretically to be the girl doesn't mean that she's necessarily going to be the girl that he's looking for. She has a choice of how to act. And then after also, they sort of say, yes, this is all given by God, but we're still going to ask her opinion. And if she had said no, I mean, who knows what would have happened? They probably would have sent her anyway.
But
honestly.
she responded.
But there's a space for her to choose it again, that it's not, which is, a beautiful message I think we see throughout the stories of the Imot and Avot, that like, as much as everything is destined, by God, they're all making choices. They're making choices. They're choosing God. They're choosing Am Yisrael. They're choosing kindness.
And the choices they make are eternally affect everything, right? So absolutely, and it's really a true message for us as well. It is a message for us. The choices we make are very powerful, and sometimes we don't appreciate that. And in the following weeks, when we see the story of Reuven and the Midrash talking about if he had known how powerful his choice was, how he would have responded, that will tell us this, that sometimes we don't appreciate the moments we're in and how monumental they are. But thankfully she did and made those choices, and the result was wonderful. And so they bless her before she goes. And it's interesting, it is a custom for us for generations, tens and tens of generations, that before a chuppah, it is the custom to bless the bride with this blessing. Achotenu atayi la'alfei ruvava. You will become hundreds of thousands. There's a blessing that they gave to Rivka. In other words, you shall be a mother of Am Yisrael. Rivka goes with her maidens together with on the camels, and there's a very peculiar verse in verse 62. V'Yitzchak ba, and Yitzchak came, mibo be'er lachayroi, from coming to be'er lachayroi. Now in Hebrew, if you wanted to say, or even in English, somebody's coming back from somewhere, you would say he's coming from having gone to somewhere. You wouldn't say he's coming from having come to that other place. He's returning, right, coming from having come. That's not the way you would say it. You would say he's coming from having gone. But it says, V'Yitzchak ba, mibo be'er lachayroi. Yitzchak is coming from having gone to be'er lachayroi, from having come to be'er lachayroi. Now, where is this place, be'er lachayroi? Where does this show up before? This is where Hagar, when she ran away from Sarai, she had become pregnant, and Sarai felt mocked or belittled by her pregnancy and by Hagar's pregnancy and her not being able to be pregnant, and worked Hagar very hard, and Hagar ran away. And she comes to a well, and at this well, she gets a message from Hashem, a prophecy. And she sees that in a wilderness, in a place, Hagam Halom, even over here, in my destitute, a solitude space, Hashem is looking out for me, sending me a message. Lachai Ra'i, the living one, sees me. It's a very powerful idea. She calls the well by that. Yitzchak doesn't go there. He comes home to Be'er Lachayroi. He recognizes the strength of the message that Hagar had, and in the naming of this well, and he goes there for his own nourishment of source as a source of his own connection with Hashem, his own connection with depth. As the next verse says, that he went out lasuach basadeh. He went out to really. Siach is the growth of the field. Siach hasadeh, lasuach basadeh is to become a part of the growth of the field. This is a form of meditation, of allowing the nature to help you grow. Prayer. And Yitzchak goes there, but where does he go? He goes to Be'er Lachayroi, but he doesn't go there. That's his home. He comes to Be'er Lachayroi. And when he's nourished, he now comes home. Right? When you go somewhere, you're going away from your home place to someplace else. Yitzchak is home at Be'er Lachayroi. And when he's full, now he can come back to where is his home. So that's this term of bo. He's coming, mibo, from having come to Be'er Lachayroi. At one point, Be'er Lachayroi was his home, and now he feels ready to come and face his new bride and to come and establish a home, having gone to Be'er Lachayroi. But he's not finished with that. After he establishes his home, and Avram remarries, and then Avraham dies, it is there too that in chapter 25, verse 11, Yitzchak establishes his home at Be'er Lachayroi. He goes back to this very place as well. And very interesting, he needed that connection with Hashem of having been seen even in solitude after the Akedah. Very, very powerful. Thank you, Anne. So this is the message of Yitzchak, Be'er Lachayroi. One last point. He comes, it says, the servant tells Yitzchak the whole story in verse 67. And Yitzchak is 67, he takes Rivka to his mother's tent. Vayikach et Rivka v'tehilo leisha, and now he's married, and vayehaveh, and he loved her. Very powerful idea. The Torah says here, the power of that connection of love, and that when two people have a spiritual connection, a connection of ideals and values, that that love can come after marriage. It didn't have to come beforehand. And another idea, Vayinachem Yitzchak acharei imo. Yitzchak is a 40-year-old man and needed consolation for his mother, who had passed a while back. But this allowed for him to have that emotion and to have that strength and healing, because he was able to bring his own wife, a matriarch who he came to love, into the tent that was his mother's. Very powerful idea with Yitzchak and Rivka as well. The end is Abraham remarrying with Keturah, Yishmael and Yitzchak making amends and burying their father, and the beginnings of their families. That's the end of the Parsha. Yasher Koach. Thank you for joining.